Okay. Well, you guys, y'all generously blocked out 90 minutes for me. I hope I can fill that with useful and informative information. I figure I'm gonna try to shoot for about 50 to 60 minutes and then kind of open it up to questions if that's all right with y'all. And if that's okay for the agenda, should I just, without further ado, just launch into it?
Yeah, no, have at it, Lars.
And is my audio coming through okay?
Yep.
Okay, and everyone can see. So, well, let's just try this. I'm phoning in from Texas here, so I hope the internet's good. Well, my presentation's called Land is a Big Deal, but it has an alternate title, which is how municipal property tax assessors are uniquely positioned to save the world just by doing their day-to-day jobs. And has an alternate title, which is here's some cool new tools that are coming online that can hopefully make your jobs easier, and why that matters. Right. And so who am I? Why am I crashing the party of the Alaska Assessors Association if I'm down here in Texas, which is climatically opposite of Alaska? Well, I wrote this book called Land is a Big Deal. I've been a researcher for a while in land economics, and I'm now getting into mass appraisal myself with my colleague here, Will Jarvis. And the premise of this book is that land is a really big deal and that we should all take that much more seriously. And in places like Alaska, we have quite a lot of land, and you have natural resources and your whole permanent fund and all that. This is all hopefully quite relevant to y'all. And so what do I mean when I say land is a big deal? Well, if we look at human progress over the last hundreds of years, GDP has just been going up. Like, people are getting richer, there's more technology, there's more everything, we're more advanced. And yet the one thing that's really sticky is that the rent and the price of housing keeps going up, despite the fact that television prices, like the price of a television or a toy or clothes or food on average, is going down. The price of housing keeps going up. And this is even after you account for inflation. Housing inflation is kind of this super form of inflation. And why does that keep happening? Well, it's because real estate has become the world's biggest asset class. And not just in terms of what I mean by that is, like, this is where people park their money. It's an investment nowadays. And because we can't really make more land, it's a particularly high leverage asset in terms of how much you can get other people to pay you for owning it. When we talk about real assets, we mean atoms, right? Not just financial paper wealth. If you unspool all the financial paper wealth to what it points to, real estate is over 2/3 of that. And if you break it down into like buildings and stuff, like land still sticks out as like 35%. And then of course, being Alaskans, you'll understand the importance of mineral wealth. If you stick on mineral wealth as a kind of economic land, stuff that nobody made, right? That's about 40% of all real assets is just land and minerals, right? And our policies don't really understand this. And basically my thesis is that it's super important for the people who have been tasked to measure this stuff to measure it really well and really efficiently. Like, I think you are some of the most important civil servants in the entire government. And I'm not just trying to suck up to you when I say that. I think it's this very underappreciated thing. The majority of bank loans are for real estate. This chart tops out at 2010 at about 60% of bank loans just bidding up the price of real estate. And it is even higher now, right? And this is a truly global phenomenon. It's not just in America. In other countries, it's worse. China, it's 87% of bank loans is just bidding up real estate. USA and Norway, it's 68%. Canada, it's 51%. They'll catch up soon enough. And this has just exploded since 1920, right? And realtors kind of give the game away about what causes real estate to go up in value. The three most important things in real estate are location, 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 right? Land. And you've probably heard the phrase buy land. It's the only thing they're not making any more of. And of course, you even see this in pop culture sometimes. Some of y'all might have seen the Charlie Brown Christmas special. Lucy asks what she really wants for Christmas is real estate. And I can't remember when that was made. I think it was made in the 70s. That would have been a really good Christmas present because real estate bought in the 70s has appreciated in value by significant multipliers if you bring it forward all the way to 2022. And that's without Lucy necessarily doing anything with her real estate. It's just the location that she owns that's gone up in value so much. Back in the ancient days of like kings and queens and princes and princesses and knights, farmland used to be how you became wealthy. But all of that wealth has now shifted almost entirely in it's stayed in land, but it's a different kind of land. Now it's about residential land that gatekeeps access to good jobs, especially in urban areas. You can see in Spain, Britain, France, and then this alternate graph of the UK, the green here is land. And here, this pink in Spain is residential land. The building structure itself is this darker red here that's mostly stayed flat. And you can see in US cities, almost all the value of real estate is in the land. Here's a vacant lot in downtown San Francisco. It's about $2 million just for the dirt, right? And it's not even a big lot. And the townhome next door, which is about the same size, is like a little bit more because there's a building there, but not much, relatively speaking, And studies confirm this. AEI, American Enterprise Institute, based off of some data by Will Larson, who works for the federal government, has mapped out the land share of property across the United States. And as you get to the places like the biggest metros, like it gets as high as 70% of the value of real estate is just the location, right? And so this has really strong implications for us as people specializing in mass appraisal, right? So where do we assessors come in, right? So if real estate and land is a huge deal, and assessors are the ones tasked with measuring the value of this huge deal accurately, if those assessors can get better at this, it would be truly transformative for society. Because if you think of public policy, as like carpentry, right? What do they say in carpentry? Measure twice, cut once, right? So if we can get better and faster at measuring this huge deal in the economy more accurately, that can really do wonders for making those who make policy decisions based off of our measurements. The downstream consequences of that could be enormous. But right now, I feel like most of people in the assessment industry, you guys, you're Superman. But right now, you've been given the tools of Clark Kent. And so I want to give you the power to rip open your buttoned up shirt and become the superheroes you deserve. And to do that, you need superpowers, right? So who are we, right? We're Geo Land Solutions. That's a working name. We'll probably have changed it by next week. But for now, we're calling ourselves Geo Land Solutions. We started as a research group. We're now a company. Don't worry, this is not explicitly a sales pitch here. We're very much in the phrase of coming out of the world of academia and into the world of actual working assessors. We want to take the latest and greatest research methods and turn them into actual practice. And for that, we have gone on a listening tour to figure out what working assessors actually need and want, because it's one thing to write a paper and put it in some journal and everyone's like, yeah, those numbers sure look nice. But if it doesn't translate into working within the quite difficult constraints that you working assessors often have to actually work with, it's no good. Like, it's like, here's this great method. And you're like, great, but my statutes require me to do it this way. So it's no good that you have a better method that I'm not legally allowed to use, for instance. Or, yeah, that's a great methodology, but it assumes that I have much better quality access to data than I actually do. So I can't use it, right? And so we've gone on this tour of talking to a bunch of assessors in different places. And one of the reasons we've come here today is to show you what we've learned so far and to get your specific feedback, from the great state of Alaska about what's been going on in your areas and what you need specifically. I understand Alaska is a lot more rural than most places in the United States, and you are unique in so many different ways. So that's kind of what we're trying to figure out today. So with that said, I'll move on and share some things. What comes up when we talk to assessors about superpowers that they wish they had, and there's kind of three broad categories. And the first one is data. They really want 12 states of the union of real estate non-disclosure, right? So people would like access to more data than they have. Like most assessors gather their own data, they go out, they knock on doors, they send people out, they do sketches, they do all of that stuff. But a lot of them would always like to have more and better data, specifically for real estate transactions, right? Because everyone's always chasing the market. Second is modeling. And this one varies depending on who we're talking to. Some people want to know how they can start to have their own in-house modeling shops, right? And they would like to know about the latest models and how they can work them into their workflows. And others are like, we don't have that kind of budget. We're not really equipped for that. We would like the advantages of that, but if we could outsource that to someone to do it for us, that would be grand. And then other people are like, well, if you can kind of show us the results of it, and we could like kind of check against it, but we can still do our in-house model. But we'd like a second opinion, right? And so we can kind of compare against that. And then there's people who tell us that what they really want is tools and visualization. A lot of y'all tell us that you're working with your Canvas software and that the less you have to rock that boat, the better. But if you could have some visualization tools to like easily show you a God's eye view of your jurisdiction, let you click and search and filter and get that rich context, that would be really, really helpful, right? So let's drill down into a couple of these. And I think now is a really interesting time in mass appraisal because there's a lot of new technology that's coming online now that is bringing costs down and making new things possible that weren't before. And one of the first things on the list is aerial data, right? So I'm sure that a lot of you might already be using some form of aerial data. But we're really facing what we call a SpaceX moment for aerial data, I feel like. And when I talk about a SpaceX moment for aerial data, for those of you who don't follow the space industry as much as I do, Elon Musk's company, SpaceX, they brought down the cost of putting a payload into space by 10x. You know, a massive change, which changes entirely the kinds of space-based businesses that are viable, right? Like piping broadband internet to everybody everywhere in the world, even if they're in a war-torn country, for instance, right? That didn't used to be possible before. And so there's third-party partners like Near Space Labs and Urban Sky that are poised to massively reduce costs for aerial imaging. You know, they're claiming they can get the cost down to like $5 per square kilometer, you know, for a single mission. And that means not just that they can reduce the cost of high resolution aerial data, but also that they can increase the frequency with which you get it. You know, imagine if for your jurisdiction, you could get it annually, right? High quality data annually. And then people like us could process it for you, dialed into exactly what you care about, right? So what kind of things could you do with it? You know, things like getting parcel boundaries and building envelopes. Some of these people are able to, you know, we can take their data and process it. It's high resolution enough that we can see individual roof tiles. So we can run machine learning algorithms over it and do quality grades. So we can tell you, you know, this person has a hole in their roof. So that building probably has some damage, right? You know, there's a lot of cracks in the pavement here that aren't over here. You know, there's a lot of trees that are close to the property, all these sorts of things that can be detected bulk and automatically and then sent to you basically as a spreadsheet ready to go, dialed in of per parcel information, right? Ready to be fed into your Canvas system or your models. Then additionally, this is probably more salient to y'all out in Alaska. There's 12 states, including Alaska, my own home state of Texas, that are real estate non-disclosure states. And the realtors would really like it if they could maintain a data monopoly on transactions and keep it out of the assessor's hands. Well, third-party partners like TransUnion have realtor independent access to real estate transactions. And in Texas, we've been using this data for about 2 years. The Texas assessors have been using it. And it's really transformed the quality of the assessments they're able to do now. Before they, you know, had to beg for data and kind of guess, and now they have actual ground truth real estate transaction data. And it's been a major boon here. And I shared this information with Joe Casey and Jack Adamus over at Anchorage, and you know, they seem pretty excited about it. And I hope that being made aware of these kind of new data opportunities in Alaska can really help you get around some of the traditional ways your hands have been tied behind your backs, and let you become, you know, these are the kind of super hero powers I'd like folks like y'all to have. I've seen this data. It's pretty high quality. It lets you route around non-disclosure. I'm excited to start using it myself. I don't currently have a sales relationship with TransUnion. That might change in the future, but like they're not paying me right now to tell you this or anything. And there's probably other data partners out there that I don't know of yet that I would like to scare up and find out about. But so like, okay, great. So there's more data out there that's available that can be aggregated and sourced from these third-party vendors. You know, what can we do with it, right? How can it actually change your job? So one thing is that you can get parcel change update or notification systems. I know some of you are probably working with some of those already, but those can be dialed in and made better, made more frequent, and have higher detailed information they give you. Like I said, you can get quality scores from looking at roof tiles. You can sketch building envelopes automatically from aerials. You can validate your own data sets, right? If your data set says it was a vacant lot transaction at this location at this time, but then you see that actually at that time there was a building there, well, that can totally change your model, right? And you can discover unlisted improvements such as pools, swimming pools is, that people are trying to hide from the assessor is a typical thing that these kind of aerials can find. I'm not sure how popular swimming pools are in Alaska, where it's quite a bit chilly, but what do I know? You know, I'm sure there's some other locale specific feature like this that you could detect, especially when you've got large remote areas that you don't feel just really enthusiastic about sending your assessors all over creation to go inspect manually. And then these services can also do obliques where they can automatically measure the height of buildings. And basically my point is all of this stuff is going to become cheaper, more available, and more frequently available than it has in the past. So whatever assumptions you've had about this data in the past, I think it's about we're reaching a major inflection point, and then processing this and dialing it in to your exact needs is what a group like us is really interested in doing, and learning today what you would like above and beyond just the raw data. Right now, let's talk about visualization and validation and tools, right? This is something a lot of assessors have told us they're interested in. So this is from one of our own models. I think this is of Philadelphia. And this is a demo we show of a real problem we found in a model we were building of how visualization can really help you. If you don't have visualization tools and you're just looking at everything directly in a CAMA line by line or in Excel, you can miss things because right here, this is a map you're looking at of land value per square foot of all these properties in Philadelphia, of all these transactions that have sold. And we see this $32 per square foot sticking out like a sore thumb in the sea of $200, $300, $400 per square foot neighborhood. Like, what is going on there? That outlier needs to be explained. And it sticks out like a sore thumb on a map, whereas on a spreadsheet, you might not notice it at all. And so we zoom in, they're two side-by-side properties, right? And so we built a visualization where you can click on the one and see all of the model properties. And so we can see that maybe it's like, so I have a hypothesis. Maybe the property on the right just sold for really cheap. So maybe it's not an arm's length sale. But when we zoom in, we actually see that the parcel on the right at $32 per square foot, it actually sold for more than the property on the left. It sold for $452,000 versus $350,000. So what else could it be? Well, then we look at the total area, and now we see the problem. Right? The property on the left sold, its total area is 848 square feet. Property on the right is 8,480. That's pretty suspicious, especially because we can tell from the parcel boundaries. I mean, the building envelope boundaries that they're almost exactly the same size. So it's pretty clear that whoever was collecting this data, or maybe even the computer itself, somehow introduced an extra zero on that second property. And that's why it's worth an order of magnitude less. It's just a phantom error caused by a data ingestion problem. And now, so there's two twin benefits to an automated system is one, the visualization can tell you when you have a problem like this, and your human eyes can pick out the pattern very quickly. And then a script can be added to the system that knows to check for this category of error and eliminates it in the future so that it can validate your entire data set because it has the parcel boundaries, right? It can identify whenever anything is like massively above or below its neighborhood values, and then check for things like the parcel boundary size doesn't agree with the inputted boundary size, and then automatically check that for you or flag it for you for manual review and be like, hello, Mr. or Mrs. Assessor, here's your data. I found these problems in it. Would you like to manually validate these 36 rows and look at them on the map and tell me what you think the right value is, right? It's the power is still in your hands, but we just solve the problem of the scut work of identifying these issues that are traditionally kind of invisible if they're just hiding in a spreadsheet, right? So like I said, automatic validation can check for errors in your data, right? It can also flag horizontal inequity. We see this in cities like Detroit. This is when you have cities that are on the same street, but they're similar build quality, similar locations, similar house type, same number of bedrooms and bathrooms, but the valuations per square foot are very different, right? So whenever those properties are the same and the location is very close, you would want those values to stay very similar. And when you have an overly manual process, that check becomes very, very labor intensive. So it would help, a lot of assessors have told us, if there's a step that could be overlaid that checks all that automatically and flags any outliers for you. Some people have systems like this already, some people don't. But one of the things we like to do is to build these kind of systems. Vertical inequity is another issue. This is where higher priced properties are either over or under assessed chronically relative to lower priced properties. And typically this can happen even if you're doing your job right, just as a structural issue, because people with more valuable property, we all know they like to protest their taxes more often. And so at least in a lot of the jurisdictions we see. And so with good checks, you can kind of detect those structural inequities that kind of prop up through no fault of the assessor's own, but just because of just the frequency of who protests and who doesn't, to kind of catch those things so you can have a happier constituency overall. And then we like to release all the models we make open source, so that we can be more transparent about them. And so any assessors who adopt our methods, or become clients of ours can, have that confidence to the public that it's like, this isn't just some scary black box that spits out an answer you can't interrogate. There's, all of this is being kind of done out in the open. And this kind of stuff can solve a lot of the low-hanging fruit data issues quickly and easily, and then free up your time to focus on the more nitty-gritty problems. Another thing that we frequently have seen is that a lot of assessors will build their own local tools, but then they have a challenge of keeping them up to date. And then everyone has their own little local something, their little local flavor. And one thing we're really enthused by is to take all these little solutions people have made for their jurisdiction and share them with other people. Like one jurisdiction has a check my value tool, right, that does these vertical and horizontal equity checks. And then anyone can plug in their property, their address, and see how it's valued relative to their neighbors. And of course, the assessor has used this tool themselves before they publish that year's validation and made sure everyone's at least in the green or yellow zone so that they look good, right? But it gives that confidence to the public. And why should only one jurisdiction have that? We talked to that assessor. It's like, would you mind if we build something like that and shared it with other assessors? And he'd be like, I'd love that, right? And if you could then come back and find out what they're building and share it with me, so that everyone can be using, these things that are informed by everyone's, working experience. And so then we move to modeling, right? The actual nitty gritty of coming up with values, right? What are assessors doing? In our survey, we found about 85% of people are mostly in the cost approach and sales adjusted cost approach method, where you're using your Marshall and Swift tables and then kind of try and chase the market and keep those updated. I don't know about the situation in Alaska. In a lot of other jurisdictions, people complain often that whatever tables that the state is giving them are often out of date, and then they have to update them manually themselves and come up with multipliers and adjustments and stuff. A couple of places are using the more advanced methods like multiple regression, geographic weighted regression, and gradient boosted trees, which is a more advanced machine learning method. But those are kind of in the minority, and a couple of places have in-house shops. Some of them do modeling, but they outsource it to a different shop. Our dream is that all of you could be using the most state-of-the-art advanced methods without any real without any additional complexity burden on your ends. Try to find a way to make these new tools for modeling and value, coming up with values, make that more transparent and easy to use for you, and meet y'all where you're at. And within the boundaries of the statutory requirements that you already have. And so let me give an example of one of these more advanced methods that one of our modelers here has created. And this is geographically weighted regression. Because one thing we often hear when people use multiple regression is that they will divide their city up into, 50, 100, 200 neighborhoods, however many it is. I know that might be less in Alaska where your population's lower. But basically, they divide every little neighborhood up into its own space. And then they run regression on every single one of those, and they do that all manually, and it's quite labor intensive. So geographic weighted regression is this new kind of model that's been out for, it's been out for a couple decades. It performs local regression at each sale and then pulls in weights from nearby observations. It kind of gives more weight to nearby observations. So it basically does that method you have of splitting up your city into discrete neighborhoods. It kind of does that for you all through one big regression model. And what it does is it allows the model to vary by location. Like typically multiple regressions kind of flaw is that it'll tell you that the marginal value of an extra third bedroom is exactly this many dollars, right? And so you know that maybe that the demand for that is different in this part of town versus this part of town. And so if you do a bespoke regression model for each separate neighborhood, you can then get different values. Well, this will allow those values to vary, those coefficients to vary automatically. And you can kind of see here in this screenshot, the age coefficient. So this shows that the amount people are willing to pay based on how old an property is different based on what part of Seattle you're in. You know, in this northern part of Seattle where it's purple, you know, the coefficient's weaker. Down here, it's a little stronger where you see more variation in house prices based solely on, you know, the marginal age of the building. And this typically does achieve better result ratio studies than multiple regression analysis. But it's typically considered, you know, a kind of advanced method. And we want to make this something that's more available, more out of the box. Like if you can just provide your data, we can give you access to the results of this algorithm and make it very easy to steer for you without having to do all the horrible code boilerplate to run it. And then just going through here, you know, here this shows you the kind of the local R squares, the fit of the model. And then this shows you the age coefficient again. You can see how it varies, different parts of the city. This shows you like total square footage, right? We know that bigger parcels can be worth more. And that can be like a nonlinear relationship even because there's more you can do with the lot. But how much of a premium people put on that can really depend on the location, and GWR can figure that out for you, right? There's some caveats to it. It's not perfect. It's got a potential to overfit, you know, so you can get it can sales chase a little much. And then because it's figuring out these spatial relationships automatically, if you put in spatial variables like zip code and whatever, you can confuse it because you don't need to do that. It's figuring out the geographic stuff. So if you give it extra spatial information, you can confuse it. And it can have prediction problems at boundaries, right? Where it should be a sharp transition because you just crossed the railroad track, so to speak. So there is ways to dial that in. Generally, what we like to do is run multiple models, right? Standard regression and GWR, and then the more advanced gradient boosted trees, as well as like the cost approach, and then give people, you know, all the answers, right? From each different one, so they can kind of like mix and match and compare. And then another thing, you know, we started this off by talking about how land is a big deal. Well, our kind of obsession is separating the value of land versus improvements. In some jurisdictions, this is because they want to do these new innovative tax policies like split rate property tax, where you tax property and buildings at different rates. Because frankly, taxing property tax all in a lump sum basically encourages people to hold land out of use rather than build. And so like I come from Texas, right? And in Houston downtown, there's all these vacant parking lots downtown. If we had split rate property tax, people would be more incentivized to build homes for people, have less of a homelessness problem, all that good stuff. But that's irrelevant from, that's somewhat irrelevant from an assessor's perspective because you care about, you know, measuring accurately rather than policy. But sometimes I'm just saying that you'll get demand for policy unlocks that are only possible if you, if the assessor's office has access to certain technology, like being able to accurately separate land from buildings. And if we look at the ways people are currently separating these, it varies widely by jurisdiction. I'd be curious what people are doing in Alaska. In some jurisdictions, it's just, they just do the ratio allocation method, where basically they've come up with a number somehow for what share they think the land is. And in some places, it's quite low. Like in Philadelphia, it's like 20%, right? And that's the rule that the assessor doesn't have a choice. Like that's just handed down. It's like all the land is 20% of whatever the total property is, regardless of location. But independent studies have shown that it's like, hey, that could be as high as 70%, and it could vary quite a lot. And so there's these other models people use to separate land from improvements, right? Like improvements, I mean, things like building, you know, this little monopoly piece here, like Park Place is the land and the hotels and the houses are the improvements. You know, there's the linear regression, which is an additive model, like the marginal value of a third bathroom is, you know, X $1,000 or whatever. And you can add all those up, you know, your bathroom value, your bedroom value, your brick facade value until you have like your total building value. And then everything else is land. You have log-log regression, which gives you multipliers rather than additives. So it's like, okay, because the lot is this much bigger, it's worth this much more, you know, because it's 2 stories, you multiply everything by 1.2 or whatever. Then there's automated weight smoothing, which comes out of this paper called Colby et al. Out of Germany, which talks about how you can observe vacant land sales, and kind of extrapolate underneath buildings to get at the land value, which is quite interesting. For instance, that San Francisco vacant lot I showed you, because it's next door to another building, you can surmise that the land value in both locations is probably about equal per square foot. So you can kind of shove that land value underneath there and then figure out what it's worth based on the square footage of the parcel. And then what's left over, the residual, is the building value. And then we have our own experimental method we call the Sudoku method. We haven't dialed this in perfectly yet, but we think it could be quite promising. And this is a new model we're working in. We'll publish in the literature about this. And when you're playing Sudoku, much like a crossword puzzle, you're gathering little bits of data, little puzzle pieces from all over the city, and they have to fit together and agree with each other, right? And so our model basically, builds off of the kind of known model of, okay, you take pairs of sales, right? If you can automate at a large level, you can automatically identify similar buildings, but in different locations, right? And then you can make some assumptions about, well, if the buildings are almost identical in multiple locations, probably at least some, if not most, of the difference in value and observed sales or rents is probably due to location. And then you can have that as a hypothesis and then test it against other models that can check it, right? You can do that not just across space, but across time with repeated sales of the same building, right? If the same building has been maintained and then resold several times, probably it's the location that's getting more valuable rather than, bricks suddenly becoming 10 times more valuable over, a certain period of time, although construction costs do vary. But anyway, the Sudoku method is still something we're trying to test out. We're eager to find partners to let us try it out on their jurisdictions. But that's just kind of some stuff we've seen coming down the pipe in the separating land from improvements. But we also think that because land, the reason we're interested in land first valuation models is that land characteristics mostly deal with things like distance to amenities, right? A lot of things that are very public that are very difficult to hide. Like, I haven't met an assessor who tells me, Lars, we just have perfectly omniscient knowledge of the interior of everybody's house. Like, I can tell you the perfect, I can tell you who has black mold and who doesn't, and down to the cent what that's worth. Like, almost nobody tells me that, right? But land, you can see who's next to a park. You can see how many, how many miles you are from the CB, Central Business District. You can see who's, in an up and coming neighborhood and who's kind of out in the boonies, right? And so I think if we move towards more land first models, we can, kind of say some things we didn't used to be able to say. And then I'm also got another experimental method we're working on. I talked to Joe Casey about this a little bit. A thing I often hear from people in more rural areas is that we have really sparse data, and we're not really sure, and we don't have many transactions. And so it's really hard to use these traditional sales-based methods. And then assessors typically only have access to data from their own jurisdiction, right? And so someone like us can pull data from multiple jurisdictions, multiple similar rural areas, and we're experimenting with this. We're not sure what the results are going to be yet, but we want to see if you aggregate multiple rural jurisdictions from the same overall area, like Alaska, right? Can you overcome that sparsity problem by joining together multiple counties' data and sharing it with each county, right? And then running a model across all of them and see if that tracks the market a little more accurately when you do get those transactions. And then of course supplement with transaction data partners who can give us more transaction data than we're already getting just from voluntary disclosures. So that's another thing we're experimenting with. And filling 90 minutes is kind of a challenge. I don't know how I'm doing on time. I have a lot more I can talk about if we want to go into Q&A. And that's honestly one of the things I was hoping to get out of this is I don't just want to preach on high from this ivory tower. I really want to learn what local Alaska assessors really need and want. Hang on, let me take off this jacket because I live in Texas and it's hot now. But anyway, if I could open it up to Q&A, just get some general impressions about this. Am I just way off track? Is this completely irrelevant to y'all? Is this interesting? Is this exciting? Who wants to tell me about their jurisdiction and specific problems they've had? And I can tell you what other assessors have told me and what I've seen in the literature that may be of interest to you.
All right, thank you, Lars. So has anybody got any questions or comments, something they want to talk about? Joe?
This on here?
I can't quite hear you. Can you turn up your volume?
Oh, there it is. Okay, hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you great. Mary?
Hi, this is Joe.
Oh, Joe. Hey, Joe.
So I had a question about GWR and how it compares to the neighborhood method. So why, like, what I would imagine is if you break up your data into neighborhoods and you run an individual regression based on them, right? Those individual regressions are going to spit out different coefficients for, you know, the third bedroom or whatever.
Right.
But then GWR, I guess, does that automatically, or does it do it better?
Right. Well, there's some arguments, you know, from the literature that it does give you better ratio studies, right? Our employee put this together. He's not here today. He's on an airplane. So I'm going to do my best to answer the technical questions on his behalf. But the assertions from the research is that GWR does give you better ratio studies than doing just standard MRA. And I think the reason for that is that with MRA, your samples are kind of segregated, right? You have less signal per neighborhood. GWR is kind of like, it can get insights from your whole city, but still dial into your locality, right? I think is the mechanism through which it produces it. And there are some caveats to get it to work better, and it can be a little specific to your locality, but I think that's the basic argument behind it. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Yeah.
I think the other advantage of it is that it's also less work. Like, even if it turns out that in your specific example, it just gives you the same ratio studies, like it saves you a little like tedious subdivision perhaps, right? Or it can at least validate whether, you know, maybe your subdivisions were correct if you're required by statute to do the subdivision, you know, neighborhood by neighborhood method.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I actually mentioned your TransUnion information this morning, and people had a lot of questions that I couldn't answer. So I'm going to let people ask those questions, but if they don't, I will.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I've seen TransUnion has shared like the fields with me, and so like I'm under NDA with them, so I can't like screenshot it for you, but I can answer generalities about like what's available. And at this moment, I'm getting zero commission from any of you who sign up for TransUnion. So I just want to put that forward.
Go ahead and ask away, Joe.
Okay. I'll relay some of the questions that we had. So there's the thing we can get right now, I believe, is deed of trust data. So do they have all transactions, even the ones that are conducted in cash?
So I don't know what they have in Alaska specifically, because like they've sent me their master list of fields and it's like just a drool-worthy wish list, right? I'm sure they would give you it too. But the thing is, in practice, depending on locality, like a lot of those fields will be blank, right? You know what I mean? So like, I mean, in some localities, they have information on the first and second mortgage, not just the transactions, but also like what they're paying per month in mortgage, right? You know, and all kinds of like financing details. But then that's not available for every jurisdiction. And so I'm not sure how sparse the data might be in Alaska specifically. I mean, it would be really cool if they had everything. In practice, what they tend to have is like, I've compared in Texas what their data is like compared to the local assessors data, and they have transactions, and then they have a lot of build quality information that's quite impressive. Like, they know whether you have a freaking breakfast bar, you know, and other kind of just like really minute details about interior features that you wouldn't normally have, that I was quite impressed by. But I can't speak to, you know, what kind of data they're getting in the Alaska market without laying eyes on it first.
Okay. I'll keep going until someone else raises their hand, I guess. But I guess another question I had about that was, this would be a concern, you know, because the three options that I would kind of raised this morning, now that we're thinking about this, maybe is, okay, every jurisdiction is out on their own and they buy TransUnion data for themselves, or the state might agree to just buy the entire state's data, or AAAO might say, let's put some funding out there and kind of sort of resell it to the individual jurisdictions, or have them pitch in based on the size of their market or whatever. are you aware of any, are there any like absolute requirements about who can share what data with whom, or are they usually willing to be flexible? Because part of it, for example, if a jurisdiction got that data, they would want it, I know they'd be required to share with me, the state assessor. They probably also want to be able to use it on, in appeals, right?
Right. So I don't have a lot of insight into things. I get the impression that it's a new vertical for them. And so I would imagine they're pretty flexible because they're like right now, I mostly only hear of assessors in Texas that are using it right now. And so I get the sense that this is a new vertical that's been spun up and they've spent most of their efforts in getting it in Texas, a nice big market, right? And then I think they're probably open to ideas, like if you come to them with a proposal, like, I mean, I don't speak for them at all, but I think you might have more influence than you think in kind of shaping what that deal looks like, because they probably haven't thought about, oh, could we sell to Alaska? I don't know. That's just a vague impression I get, right? So, but I would say just go bold and ask for exactly what you want. Whatever you think the best deal possible is, just like lead with that and just see what they say. I see Henry Robinson's got his hand up.
Henry, go ahead.
Do they distinguish the difference between a refinance and a sale?
That's a good question. I think that's probably a question for them because I could look in the spreadsheet here. That probably doesn't violate my NDA just to answer a general question like that.
And then the other one is, I mean, they've got the mortgage amount and stuff like that, but do they actually know what the transaction originally was for?
Yeah. The mortgage amount, what the actual transaction. Yeah, they have the transaction data for sure.
So they know exactly how much the house sold for example?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know who they're getting their data from, but they're not getting it from the realtors. This isn't just like another MLS reseller. Like presumably, like, I mean, they're TransUnion, right? They're a credit reporting agency. So clearly they're getting it from the bank that mortgaged someone's house, or whatever. So I would assume without looking that they know whether it's a refinance or an actual change of hands. I mean, just based off of, it seems like they have the assessor's data, then they have all these like enhanced fields that like add all kinds of stuff. So I would assume it's in there. Ultimately, this is a question for TransUnion because I'm not a TransUnion salesman, haven't been like fully trained on what's in there. But I've been impressed so far with what I see, and I've not found it to be any less specific than any individual assessor's database.
Okay, thanks.
Did that answer your question, Henry?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Questions, comments for Lars and Will? No.
Well, maybe I can have a question for some of y'all then. What parts of the presentation were you most interested in? We work with jurisdictions in a bunch of different places, and I know Alaska is quite unique compared to other places. So what was the most interesting part? What was irrelevant? What was stuff you already knew? You know what I mean? What was stuff that you already have, stuff that's not helpful? Was any of this new to you or interesting? It seems like the data is of particular interest, but was there anything else? Henry?
I mean, I just like the concept of potentially having a land model that is potentially usable across the state of Alaska. I think we're very different in areas, but there are some areas that have some similarities. For example, comparing like the city of Craig versus the city of Wrangell would probably have a lot of similarities. And right now, I don't think there's that cooperation between communities in that respect. And the fact that you open source your models too is also really intriguing.
Yeah, I would like to talk about that because like the standard business SaaS model is basically to build a black box, lock you guys all in, and then, cackle away as we jack up the prices 10 years down the line. Like right now, we're very much in the research phase, like figuring out what we even do. But like we intuit that like really the relationships is kind of the key thing here. And so we don't think that ultimately the technology is some huge competitive advantage for us. We think that the technology will become a commodity, so we might as well just share it and put it out there, which gives you guys the opportunity to use it and kick us to the curb, right? And so if you wanted to collaborate with us just on the open source side without ever entering a business relationship with us, I mean, we would be very excited about that. And also to just like, and I'm interested just who among you is that of interest to, you know, or like, because we see assessors of varying technical capacity, some who are huge nerds and want to like dig their hands right in, and others who are like, you know, some of this new stuff is like a little over my head, and I'd like something that's kind of, you know, more dialed into the tried and true ways of doing things.
How effective do you think this would be in a community that has, let's say, less than 30 sales a year and only has 686 parcels?
Yeah, I mean, that's quite rural. And my only answer is we won't find out until we try, you know. But we do have really, really rural areas like that in Texas as well, right? Especially out in West Texas. And those assessors are often like the ones who are the most resource constrained, right? And I think, you know, down in Texas, they could benefit from kind of taking those appraisal districts and kind of working at a level above just the tiny little view each of them has. I think if you can get access to the best data, you can at least hopefully say something more than you're able to say now. So, but we won't know until we try. And I'd like to put some open source models out there that we can all share and kind of like hack on together.
I thought the whole developing advanced models and sharing data and working outside of CAMA, I see there's obviously huge potential for that. A lot of areas in Alaska that we just don't have the capacity to do, and staffing is a large issue for us as well. So being able to share that, are you pretty much a new company that's trying to do this in Texas right now?
Yeah, we're based in Texas and North Carolina, and we're interested in doing it basically anywhere in the US where we have a friendly jurisdiction, that where they're not just so encumbered by laws that, you know, there's something for us to do. And we're a quite new company. We used to be a research group, so we've been researching these models, you know, scripts and programs and stuff just for the sake of publishing in journals and whatever. But now we're trying to get it into the hands of actual working assessors, right? And out of the ivory tower. And but yeah, Texas is a market we're quite interested in. And the reason I have this particular interest in Alaska is because when I started writing my book, you know, Joe Casey reached out to me, and, you know, we became friends, and he told me all about the Alaska market. And my dad's a hunter. He's been up in Alaska like, I don't know how many times, dozens of times. And so I have a little bit of a connection to the state, even though I am a, you know, Texas landlubber, so to speak.
Yeah, I think it's where the future is for sure. This is going to happen regardless, just when and how quickly.
I am curious about that comment you said, like working outside the CAMA. I know that with some assessors, they talk about how the CAMA is basically this like if it don't work well with a CAMA, like don't even talk to me, right? I'm wondering, what is your working relationship with your CAMA, and what does it look like to work with extra tools outside of the CAMA, and what makes that possible or desirable?
Yeah, our CAMA is basically just a database that we struggle with.
That's what most people say. Yeah, so like, I mean, would you be interested in like, you know, just some tool you don't have to install, like we just make it web-based, you just log in, you do your work, export and import, you know, is it one of those things where it's like, if I can pull data from the CAMA and put it in this other thing and visualize it and do my stuff, that's great. But the minute I have to put stuff back, it's a problem? Or is it the other way around? Or is it neither, or both?
Yeah, like a lot of the stuff we develop in Excel, put back into CAMA. I played with some stuff. GIS stuff has some analysis tools.
Gotcha.
But yeah, it's just old system in our particular case.
Right.
So updating it and keeping up to date is always a struggle. So we have to import things that develop our models outside of it.
Gotcha. So if we stick to CSV imports and exports, that makes life easier for you or not?
Yeah, I would think so.
Cool. Henry?
I'm just curious, how would you like the data? I mean, like if we could export as a CSV or an Excel, or what if like, are you putting it into like a SQL database? Can we just connect directly to the SQL database?
Yeah, I mean these are the kind of questions. I mean, no one's ever asked us what we want before because we're so interested in what you guys want to conform to that.
Well, for full disclosure, I make a CAMA software, so I'm more interested in how I could just work with other parties no matter what. But
Oh,
I
that's
also
great.
do contract assessment, so I also have a municipality that I work for.
Well, that's
So-
great. We should be friends. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I mean, ultimately we're going to have some SQL database that is running all our stuff. Right. And so, we're really trying to like meet people where they are. So we imagine for a lot of our clients, like we're going to have to just get super good at reading and writing to CSV and GeoJSONs and all that stuff. And you know, all the ArcGIS formats, QGIS, you know, just play nicely with everything. But internally, we're going to have, you know, standard SQL databases and stuff. And so if anyone wants to connect directly to that, we're happy to do that.
So yeah, we could just essentially you could grab whatever data you want from whatever criteria you put in, and then if you did want to pass data back, you could just pass it right back the same connection.
Right. That would be ideal, right? Just read, write, access both ways.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, with all the permissions figured out and everything, so the assessor is like nicely controlled and secured. And yeah, that would be ideal.
So this is Joe again, and I have a question. I don't know, this is sort of for the assessors in the room and online here, and it might help Lars a little bit, but I know I'm a little bit of an outsider more than most of the assessors here. And when I've come up with new ideas or new ways of doing things, one of the things I tend to have to think about is, okay, well, this is great and it works great and we have confidence that it works great, but are we going to be able to prove it when we are in appeals season? And I'm wondering if the assessors would agree that that is a concern that Lars should be aware of. Is how, you know, where does the rubber meet the road here in terms of what we're able to actually work with? And I wonder if anyone wants to talk about that. You know, maybe. Okay, so I just FYI, Lars, I think Alaska is a ripe state in terms of we really, you know, state laws anyways, from my perspective, get to market value. We don't have almost any requirements, and you know, IAAO recommends things, but we don't always follow that either, you know, and so we're pretty that I'd say we're pretty free to do what we want.
Right.
But I think that to me, from what I've observed, is the number one restriction is at the end of the day, boards of equalization are going to have to be comfortable with whatever arguments you're making.
Right. Well, our head of research is former IAAO, so he's making sure that we align to standards, at least from the international body. But another thing we come to find is like, what are your local standards, right? You know, it's one thing to be like, have an explainable model, like in the abstract, like, yeah, this is explainable, but often explainable like has like hard requirements from like actual statutes, like you need to hit these 3 points or you fail equalization because the law says so, versus, you know, a jury of your peers like was impressed. You know, so if you have any kind of details like that to share with us, you know, you don't have to read me verse and chapter here, but any kind of details that we should be aware of, you know, are things we want to learn.
Well, the great thing is that the state doesn't say a whole lot about that, but the bad thing is that means you have to learn 24 different local boards of equalization standards potentially.
Gotcha. Yeah. You know, I imagine so. You know, I mean, if you have that together, I'd love reading, even if it's a lot. So like if and when we get around to Alaska, you know, we would love to, you know, digest and learn all those standards. One thing we found is like visualization can be a really powerful tool in appeals. Like the assessors in other states that we've talked to, I hope the same pattern would continue in Alaska. They tell us that whoever comes in that's more prepared and can objectively show that their values follow a procedure rather than like being kind of loosey-goosey, like I just follow this procedure and these are the results. And by the way, that procedure, here's where it comes from and here's how it's aligned to standards, both state standards, local standards, and IAAO standards. Whoever shows up with more of that tends to like always win the appeal. And it's usually the assessor in the people who from the people we talk to is like when the assessor does those things. And I feel like a lot of your standards, if you're not already got tools that check yourself against your own standards, like really aggressively and conveniently, I feel like there's no reason you shouldn't have that kind of a tool. And what that looks like day to day, I would love to work with some of y'all to kind of build that for Alaska and for your locality to figure out what that looks like.
Okay, anybody else? I do have one question for Will. Who's your furry friend?
Oh, did the dog hop in? That's
Yeah.
Mr. Goose. Sorry about that.
No,
He
no,
interrupted.
worries. He was pretty hilarious. So glad he could join us.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a Zoom call without a pet Zoom bomb.
Absolutely. Okay, anybody else in the room online? Lars, I did have one question for you. So I
Yeah.
see here in your email, you've got a map. Do they have any indication that they have data for Alaska?
Yeah, I was wondering about that. Yeah. Oh man, am I still sharing my screen? Glad I'm not on anything embarrassing. But yeah, this is the map they shared with me about the local market data that TransUnion has. And I don't know if this is just lower 48, right? You know, like they always do, like they always cut out Alaska and Hawaii. You know, New Zealand shares your pain, you know. So I'm not sure if they're saying that they don't have any Alaska data or they're just showing me availability in the lower 48. Joe, have you made contact with TransUnion? Did they say anything?
I haven't, no. Sorry.
Okay. I talked to TransUnion last week and I think they had some data in Alaska, but they'd literally never thought before about like, oh, we should like maybe sell to the people there, you know, because I mean, they're basically mostly just selling in Texas right now, even though they have all this data. So I don't know if they have this or not in Alaska. I would really hope they do. I believe there's no reason they couldn't have it because I mean, you can get your credit reports from TransUnion in Alaska. That means they probably have the data. It's all just a matter of them putting it into the vertical, I would assume. But a call to TransUnion would fix that. There's this guy called Josh Ledgerwood who put this vertical together that I can introduce any of you to if you're not introduced to him already.
And we'll follow up with Josh and let you guys know after this call.
All right,
Go ahead,
sounds
Jack.
good. Thanks, Will.
You got a question for me?
I just want to follow up that I did talk to Josh, and they do have data for Alaska.
Oh, cool.
The one thing to this group is the one I would say almost a caveat is this is primarily residential data. There's really no commercial data in this data set. So that's just one thing to be just keep in the back of your mind as you would move forward with it.
Right. So does anyone use third-party data from other people who provide commercial data sets like CoStars or whatever? Does anyone here currently use that? Anybody? Guess not.
Doesn't look like it.
Yeah. I wonder if CoStars, that's traditionally who people go with for commercial data. I wonder if they have Alaska data. I could ask and let y'all know. And then a question, what about the aerial data? Is that of interest to anyone?
No, we got somebody chiming in.
We use aerial data quite a bit, yeah.
Yeah. Who are you using right now?
Eagle View. and
Okay, cool. Yeah, we hear that name a lot. How
for-
frequently do you get data from Eagle View?
We've been experimenting with it, just us, and I think Kenai, I don't know who else does, but last couple of years, the bank's been using them.
Right. So I bet you with competition coming in from Urban Sky and Near Space, that even Eagle View, they're probably going to get better too in these coming years, just because competition is driving that. So it's cool to hear some of y'all using using those change finders and those aerial services, because we're really excited about where they're gonna go and evolve in the next couple of years. Okay, and we got someone in the chat. Dan Nelson says CoStar does have some AK data, some Alaska data. Dan, are you using that Alaska data from CoStars yourself, or do you just know of it?
I just know of it. We used it in the lower 48.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So
And
there's enough-
we looked at it a couple times, and we've had some appeal data packets with CoStar data in it.
Yeah, I can't imagine y'all getting a worse deal on any of this data if you went in together than if you all went in individually to try and buy it, right? You know, you always get bulk discounts if you get in more. So, I mean, at the very worst, you would just get the same deal you would get if you all went individually. And I could imagine you could probably negotiate some group discounts for yourselves if you went on a higher level. And of course, I don't speak for any of these party providers, and they're currently not paying me any commissions to tell you that. Yeah, I'm happy to, you guys book me till 6, I think. So I'm happy to stick around and answer questions, or if you guys want to break early and go get some lunch or whatever, I'm happy to do that too.
Yeah, not seeing any other questions from the group here. And anybody else online have anything else?
I will say, you can reach me at lars@geolandsolutions.com. I'm going to pop that in the chat here. So Henry, specifically, I'd love to follow up with you about the kind of stuff you're doing, but anyone who wants to reach out to me, regardless of whether you have any intent of ever hiring us, if you just want to be friends, you want access to the open source stuff when it comes out, you want to just like shoot, just talk and talk shop sometime, please feel free to reach out.
Sounds great, Lars. Appreciate it. And Will, thanks for joining us. And yeah.
Thanks very much.
Anything
Thanks,
else
folks.
before we sign off? No?
Okay, cool. Well, we really appreciate it. We really appreciate you making so much time in your event for some out-of-staters like us to hopefully share your passion for assessment.
Absolutely. Thanks. Okay, and with that, I'm gonna adjourn the meeting unless somebody's opposed. Has anything else they want to add? No? Okay. Hearing none, and we will sign back on 9 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Cheers.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.